Welcome back to Between the Bells. Today I have a video for you guys on the 7 ways that the UFC needs to change moving forward into 2027. There's been a lot that's been going on in the UFC recently. They just signed that Paramount Plus deal a couple months back. Dana White could be retiring in the next couple of years. Regardless of what he says, he won't be around forever. So I wanted to make this video on a couple of things that I would tweak and do differently just to make the UFC better overall. So without further ado, let's get started with number one. The rankings need to hold more significance. Too often we see people getting title shots that frankly aren't deserving of them. I think it's unfair to a lot of fighters to just disregard the rankings. So here's what I would do. The title shot needs to automatically go to the number one ranked contender unless they're injured or they've already fought for the title and lost. Too often we see people getting title shots that are outside the top 5, and I know sometimes there are special circumstances where that may be justified, but most of the time I think it's totally unfair to everybody who's ranked above them to see somebody ranked below them get a title shot. So here's what I would do. If either of these two things are true and the number one ranked contender is either injured or they've already fought for the belt and lost, the UFC needs to go down the list one by one and try and make a matchup until they can. I don't want to see people getting a title shot that don't have a chance, that aren't going to make the title fight competitive. And here I have a picture of Islam Makhachev and Renato Moicano because at UFC 311 a while back, they gave Renato Moicano a title shot when he was ranked number 10 in the lightweight division at the time. Now, I know that this was a special circumstance. Originally, it was supposed to be Arman Tsarukyan fighting for that title, and then he had to pull out like less than 24 hours before the card even started. So I know that doesn't happen very often, so the UFC had to scramble and just make something and just, get some fighter to fight Islam. And Renato Moicano was the one who stepped up ultimately. Props to him for stepping in, but at the time he was ranked number 10. It was just unfair that he was the one to get the title shot. And I know that the UFC probably tried to get somebody else in there, but there should have been 5 or 6 other guys before Moicano that were in there fighting. We saw what happened 4 minutes and 5 seconds into the first round. Islam gets his Darce choke, submits Moicano. It just wasn't a competitive fight, and that's what I want to prevent. I want to prevent non-competitive fights, especially in title fights, from happening because the rankings need to mean something. If we've got rankings, why do we have them in the first place if they don't really mean anything? Look at Arman Tsarukyan right now. He's the number one ranked lightweight, and he might not even get a title shot. They might give it to Oliveira over him. So I just want to prevent that from happening. Let's put some structure into these rankings and actually make them mean something. This one's pretty straightforward. And we couldn't talk about the rankings if we don't address the new Meta AI rankings that the UFC just dropped a couple days back. So on here, I have a couple of fighters that their rankings have changed in these Meta AI rankings. There's a couple that I want to talk about. The one that I think is most unfair is giving Alex Pereira the number 4 ranking in the heavyweight division. I'm sorry, but that is bullshit. Alex Pereira's fought at heavyweight once in his entire life. Not only did he lose, but he got knocked out. So to say that he's the 4th best heavyweight in the UFC is ridiculous. I don't get it. I don't know why it's justified. A lot of these other changes in rankings, they just don't seem justified to me. There's no good reason for a lot of these changes. What I don't understand now is that we have 2 sets of rankings. We have the old set of rankings, and now we also have the new Meta AI rankings, which doesn't make any sense to me. If we're going to have rankings, just have one set of rankings and don't make it confusing, because now we have 2 sets of rankings where, you're ranked differently in both, so it just doesn't make any sense to me. The only ranking change that I might agree with in the Meta AI rankings is the Derek Lewis change. He went from rank number 11 to unranked in the AI rankings, and other than that, I don't really agree with any of the other ones. Carlos Prates got ranked above Ian Gary at welterweight, and Ian Gary already fought Prates and beat him, so the fact that he's ranked above him just doesn't make any sense to me. Ian Gary's fighting for the title shot in August. So none of these really make sense to me. I don't really get it. And when the UFC releases these AI rankings and they have all these AI commercials, it does kind of concern me, and it makes me think that maybe they're not putting in a lot of effort into what they're producing there at the UFC. So it does worry me a little bit. So I just wanted to talk about that for a bit. There's not much else you can say. I mean, I don't really get it, but nonetheless, we move on to number 2, which is inactivity needs to be punishable. Now, as of today, I think the UFC does a pretty good job of punishing fighters who don't fight for a very long period of time, but I just think it needs to be a bigger focal point in the UFC. If you're not going to fight for a year, I don't think it's crazy to say that your ranking should drop 5 spots down. It's only fair that the fighters who are fighting need to get rewarded and the fighters who aren't fighting get punished, because you're a fighter, you get paid to fight. Do your job and get in there and fight. And if you're fighting once every 18 months, you need to be punished for it. You need to drop in the rankings. And I guarantee you, if they start dropping fighters' rankings if they don't fight, I guarantee you we're going to have people wanting to fight more. It's just going to be better for the UFC overall in terms of matchmaking. So I think that if a champion hasn't fought in over a year, the UFC should strongly consider stripping him of his belt. I mean, I think that's only fair. Look, you get paid to fight, so get in there and fight. If you're not going to fight, let somebody else fight for the belt or let somebody else get the matchup that they deserve. When you don't fight, you just slow the whole UFC down, and it just, prevents matchups from being made, and it just is a whole disaster. We've seen that in fighters who don't like to fight. I mean, Shavkat Rakhmonov, has fought like 2 times in the past 2 years. Leon Edwards. There's a ton of inactive fighters that it just looks bad on the UFC, and it slows the whole matchmaking process down. So this one's pretty straightforward. There's not that much else to say about this one. I don't think that this is that controversial. Look, if you're not fighting, you need to be punished for it, and it needs to be addressed. So do this, move on. It'll be better for the UFC. Number 3, back of the head strikes need to be an immediate point deduction. Now, I feel very strongly about this one, and this one's been in the media a lot recently because of Alex Pereira's fight with Cyril Gane at UFC Freedom 250, where he claims that he got hit in the back of the head. Now, here's what I'll say about that. I do think that 2 things can be true at the same time. On one hand, I do think that Cyril Gane did hit Alex Pereira in the back of the head a couple of times, but I also think that Alex Pereira is being a bitch about the whole situation. He's being a sore loser, going on all these podcasts and interviews and saying that, he's going to try and overturn the loss legally. I mean, look, just take the loss, Pereira, and move on from it. I do think that, he was hit in the back of the head, and this is a problem that should be addressed. So here's what I would suggest. Every time that there's a back of the head strike or multiple, there needs to be an immediate 1 or 2 point deduction. I don't think it's that crazy to say this, because it's not like these fighters go into these fights completely unaware that this is a rule. Look, they're well aware that they can't hit other fighters in the back of the head. Not only that, but each fighter is prepped on the rules before every single fight. So there should be no excuses for why you're hitting somebody in the back of the head. If there are back of the head strikes while the fighters are standing on the feet, I think it should be an immediate separation and a point deduction. If they're on the ground, the ref should stand them up, separate them, and then take a point. Look, if you start taking points away for people hitting each other in the back of the head, I guarantee you it'll happen less often. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now, because too often we see these refs giving 1 or 2 warnings in a fight. Look, there should be no more warnings, because every fighter is aware that this is a rule. So just take a point away. I guarantee you it'll keep the fighter safer. It'll make everything better. I'm sick and tired of seeing fights change because there's back of the head strikes. Now, I know that if you start taking 1 or even 2 points away, that can completely change the trajectory of a fight. But when you're getting hit in the back of the head, that can change not only the fight, but that can change a fighter's entire career. It's a really important issue that I think needs to be, more of an emphasis going forward. If we fix this problem, I think it'll just look a lot better. The UFC will look a lot more legit and the refs will be respected a lot more. And I know that the refs already have such a tough job already. So, it's easy for me to sit here and say that, the refs need to be better, but the refs just need to make it more of an emphasis point. Fix it and fix it now. I think it'll make everybody happy. Just do that. I think it'll make everything better. Any way that the refs can keep the fighters safer is going to be better for the UFC ultimately, especially in terms of the future. So just fix this now. It'll be a lot better for the UFC in the future. Now, number 4 might be a little bit more controversial than the others, but I do think it'll make the UFC better overall. People who become champion need to defend the belt at least 3 times before they move up or down a weight class. If not 3, it should be bare minimum 2 times before they're moving up or down, especially up, because too often we see champions become a champion and then they immediately decide to move up or down. I think it leaves a lot of questions unanswered at that weight class that they're moving away from. And it's almost like an easy way out to say, I'm not going to defend, I'm just going to go become a double champion. And I know that everybody wants to become a double champion, but you need to finish what you started at that weight class. I think it'll be better for the UFC overall if they tell fighters that they have to defend the belt 2 or even 3 times before moving up or down. And here's another thing. If you're going to move up or down a weight class, you cannot immediately fight for the title, whether it's an interim belt or an undisputed belt. I don't think that you should be able to just move up a weight class and immediately fight for the title. Now, I understand that exceptions can be made. Look, when Jon Jones says he wants to move up from light heavyweight to heavyweight and fight for the world title, you give it to him because he's Jon Jones. But 99% of the time, this should not be taking place. If you're moving up or down, I think you need at least 1, probably 2 or more fights at that new weight class for you to kind of get adjusted and for you to, just get prepared for what's to come. So make fighters defend the belt 2 or 3 times before they move up or down, and any fighter who's moving up or down, they can't just immediately be thrown in for a title shot. Obviously, if it's Jon Jones or somebody like that, an exception can be made, but I think that this would just be better for matchmaking, for, fight consistency overall. It'll make the UFC better, and I think everybody will be a little bit happier. Number 5 might also be a little bit controversial, but it's something I feel very strongly about. Get rid of the BMF belt. Look, there is no point in having multiple belts, and I think when you have a BMF belt and an undisputed belt, it takes away from the significance or importance of that undisputed title. So just get rid of it. I don't think there's anybody that's tuning into the UFC because of the BMF belt, and I don't think it creates any sort of hype that the UFC once hoped that it would do. So it really makes no sense. It serves no purpose. A lot of my friends ask me, what does the BMF belt even mean? And I say, well, it stands for the baddest motherfucker. But shouldn't the baddest motherfucker be the undisputed champion? I mean, it doesn't even make any sense to me why we have 2 belts. It's confusing. There's no point in having multiple belts. So just get rid of it. I think getting rid of the BMF belt will hold a lot more value in the undisputed belt. I think it'll make it a lot more important. When you have 2 different belts, a lot of times there's questions of like, okay, which one is the better belt? And that shouldn't ever be in question. So just get rid of the BMF belt and have 1 belt. Just make it clean and simple and straightforward and move on. Now, number 6, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about, but we need to get rid of the current weigh-in system within the UFC. It's unfair to a lot of fighters, and I think the current weigh-in system encourages extreme dehydration before a fight. Look, I don't want to see a dehydration contest. That's not what I'm here for. It's scary, it's dangerous, and how often do you see fighters essentially killing themselves just to make weight? It's really dangerous to do that to your body and to dehydrate yourself like that 30 hours before a fight takes place. It can cause a lot of health concerns. Fighters who rehydrate massively after a fight, they come in with such a big advantage. It's essentially just weight bullying. Look at a guy like Alex Pereira. When he was fighting at light heavyweight, he was weighing in at 205 on Friday, but by the time the fight came around, he was weighing in at like 245, 250 even. So when you gain that much weight, I think it makes the weigh-ins serve no purpose. There's no purpose in having all of these weigh-ins if, fighters are just going to gain that much weight back before the fight starts. I mean, I just saw an interview with Paddy Pimblett a couple days ago on Twitter of him saying that by the time he goes into the cage, he's like 185 pounds. That's 30 pounds gained overnight. Pereira's gaining almost 40 pounds overnight. It's ridiculous. There's no point in doing it the way we do it. So here's what I would suggest. Make the weigh-ins the morning of the fight. Make the weigh-ins between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. on the morning of fight day. And what you should do is pair the weigh-ins with a standardized hydration test so that you can test which fighters are dehydrating themselves, just so that you can enforce it so that it doesn't happen. The UFC should test hydration using a urine-specific gravity test. It's a hydration test that's given to a lot of athletes, and they use it in a couple of other fight leagues. So give this to a fighter right after he weighs in and require the fighters to be within a certain hydration range so that you can prevent extreme weight cuts. It'll be way safer for the fighters to do this, and then we won't have so many weight bullies who are fighting not at their true weight. Too often we see fighters who should be fighting in a weight class that's 1 or even 2 weight classes above what they actually are. Here's an idea. The UFC should regulate how much weight a fighter can gain back throughout the day after they weigh in the morning. So for the lighter weight classes, I think it's fair to say that a fighter should only be able to gain like 8% of their body weight back. For the weight classes that fall in the middle, like welterweight to light heavyweight, they should only be required to gain about 10% of their body weight back. And then for the heavyweights, they should be able to gain like 11% or maybe 12% of their body weight back. I think this is going to regulate what fighters are weight bullies and what fighters are dangerously dehydrating themselves. So it's going to keep the fighter safer. And I know that there's always going to be fighters out there that are going to try and game the system. No matter what weigh-in system you use, there's always going to be fighters that are going to try and cheat and gain an edge and an advantage. But we just need to try and minimize that as best we can. So I think this would be a pretty safe and good way for the UFC to regulate some of the weight gain and dehydration and weight cuts. The last thing the UFC needs is a fighter dying from their weight cut. So to prevent that or any other dangerous things from happening, they should do this. The other thing I think would be pretty interesting is if the UFC enforced year-round weight monitoring, kind of like random drug testing. Like if they just popped in and weighed all these fighters and tried to get them to fight more at their natural weight, I think that would just be a lot more fair. Fighters should be weighed at the beginning of their fight camps, in the middle of their fight camps, and then at the very end. And they should be forced to fight around their natural weight. Again, I think that's just going to be fair for everybody overall. Then we won't have all these huge people cutting all this weight to get down and make a certain weight, and then they're essentially way bigger than everybody else in that weight class. It's just unfair for the people that are able to do that. And you might make the argument that if they are able to cut all that weight, then they should, be able to fight at that weight class. But it's just too dangerous to dehydrate yourself like that right before a fight. I mean, you can lose a fight because of an extreme weight cut that you have, and the last thing that I want to see is the outcome of a fight being changed because a fighter had a really bad weight cut. You don't want to see that. So here are a couple reasons why I think that this would just be a lot better than what we have now. I've already kind of said this before, but the way that we do it now, it's just dangerous. It's really dangerous to lose 30 or 40 pounds right before you go in and have a fight, and it can, make you lose a lot of your strength. So just do away with it. It's going to prevent kidney injuries, heat exhaustion. It's going to prevent, fainting from happening. Too often we see fighters on the brink of death walking up to that scale the day before the fight. I don't want to see that. Again, I don't want to see a dehydration contest. It's not fun, it's scary for the fighters, and it's just dangerous for the UFC. You could also make the argument, well, okay, why don't we have fighters just weigh in like right before they walk into the cage? Like literally have the scale outside the cage, or have them just weigh in like less than an hour before the fight starts. You can't really do that because I think anybody who does try and dehydrate themselves and, cut some weight before the fight, in that case, it would be extremely dangerous to make those people fight right after. And also, if you miss weight an hour before the fight, it's going to be a nightmare to try and find a replacement fighter. The UFC is just going to scramble to try and fix the event, and you're going to get a bad fight. So I don't think you can have weigh-ins right before the fight, but I also think that the system we do now where they're weighing in like 36 hours before is also pointless. So there needs to be some sort of healthy medium in between, and I think weighing fighters in the morning is going to be that healthy medium. I think it's going to make the UFC a lot safer. It's going to keep the fighters safer, and I do think it'll just be better for fighter longevity overall. Now, number 7, pay the fighters more. And I know that this is kind of a beaten down argument, and everybody says this, so pay the fighters more, but it's not just about paying the fighters more. It's about paying the fighters their fair share of the revenue that they bring in. And let's throw some numbers out there. So the UFC signed a $7.7 billion Paramount Plus streaming deal a couple months ago. That averages out to about $1.1 billion per year through 2033. But we still have some fighters on the roster making $12,000 to show up and make weight and $12,000 to win. $24,000 before taxes is absolutely disgraceful. It's such a joke that the UFC pays their fighters this little to go in there and fight. MMA is such a dangerous sport. I mean, you're literally putting your health at risk, you're putting your life at risk, you're risking brain injury and severe body injury. On top of that, UFC fighters have some of the shortest earning windows in terms of athletes compared to, the NHL, NFL, NBA. When you're an MMA fighter, you might only have 1 year or 2 years to maximize your earning potential. And when you're making 24 grand to fight, it's ridiculous, and it's a joke, and it's pathetic that the UFC is paying their fighters this little. Here's an idea. Why don't we give the fighters some sort of a bonus for fighting multiple times a year? Like, why don't we give our fighters a $500,000 bonus for fighting 3 times a year? And if you're the champion and you fight 3 times a year, maybe $750,000. I think when you incentivize fighters to get in there and fight more consistently and you give them some more money, it'll be better for matchmaking. It'll create better cards overall. I think that when you incentivize the fighters to get in there and fight more often, we're just going to have a better league overall. It's going to be better. It's going to make it more smooth. So they need to start throwing out bonuses for fighters who fight more often and just give fighters more of an opportunity to earn more money. Now, I know Dana White has said that the fighter bonuses have been going up, and I think they did go up from $50,000 to $100,000 this year, but still, it's ridiculous that we have some fighters fighting for $24,000 a fight. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm going to repeat myself here, but it's not just about paying the UFC fighters more. It's about paying them their fair share and paying them what they're worth. Back when the UFC used to do the pay-per-view model, it used to bring in about $300 million per year. With this new Paramount Plus deal, they're bringing in over $1 billion a year. That's more than 3 times what it was before. So the fact that we still have some fighters fighting for the exact same that they were before this deal, it's laughable, and it makes the UFC look like a joke. Here's why increasing fighter pay matters way beyond just the UFC itself. If you don't pay your fighters enough, it directly impacts the perception of the UFC's legitimacy. Look at other leagues like the NHL, NBA, MLB. I mean, I know it's hard to compare the NFL or any of those leagues to the UFC because they're just so much different. The UFC is not a team sport, but nonetheless, there are bench players in the NBA making $15 $20 million per year. The fact that the UFC has a streaming deal with Paramount Plus that you can compare to any of the other big four leagues, but their fighters are just getting paid so much less is a joke. It's laughable. It looks so bad on the UFC, especially considering how dangerous it all is. I mean, these fighters are out there risking CTE and getting concussions every day that they're out there training, and they're getting paid pennies on the dollar. It's a joke. And if you pay your fighters more, it's going to encourage younger MMA fighters to continue pursuing the sport, which will ultimately help the longevity of the UFC. I mean, if you have some fighters in the UFC making $24,000 a fight, then I don't think it's crazy to think that there's going to be a lot less people pursuing MMA going into the future. So if you pay your fighters more now, today, it's going to help the future of the UFC and help people stay in the sport. I mean, if you're a young MMA fighter and you know that your earning potential and your ceiling is that low, then why would you keep pursuing the sport? And also, I think that the UFC is going to risk losing fighters to boxing and other MMA leagues if they don't start paying them more. And I think that this is when it becomes a real big issue. Conor McGregor and Francis Ngannou were two UFC fighters that I believe left at the peak of their skill and the peak of their career. Look at Conor McGregor. I mean, he didn't even fight in 2017 when he should have, because he went to go fight Floyd Mayweather, which, I don't even really blame him, because the money that he made from that fight was way more than anything he could have made from fighting any fighter in the UFC. So there's part of me that just doesn't even blame him for doing that. Now, even if Francis Ngannou wasn't in boxing right now, I don't know if he would be in the UFC, because him and Dana White have such a rocky relationship, but that's a whole nother story. But regardless, if Francis Ngannou was in the heavyweight division today, he would be by far the biggest heavyweight star in the UFC. He would be one of the biggest stars overall. I think it's a shame that we don't have Francis back in the UFC. He's such an exciting fighter with a lot of power. But when the deals are so much more attractive outside the UFC, I just can't really blame him for leaving and going somewhere else. The other thing I want to touch on is the UFC needs to prepare for what's going to happen after Dana White retires. Now, I know Dana White has publicly said that he's never going to retire, he's going to die before he retires, which that may be true, but still, Dana White's in his mid-50s, he's not getting any younger, he's not going to be around forever, and the UFC has to prepare for what the league is going to look like when he leaves. So I think it's pretty obvious that the UFC is grooming Hunter Campbell to be the new CEO. But I don't really know that much about Hunter Campbell. I mean, I know a little bit, but the UFC needs to make changes now so that fans have optimism for the future, because if they don't start making changes now, early on, then when Dana White retires, they're going to lose a lot of their fans. Also, Joe Rogan has publicly stated that the day that Dana White retires, he's also gone. So if that happens, if you lose Joe Rogan and Dana White on the very same day, you're going to lose such a big chunk of the entire UFC fan base. Something has to be done about that now so that you can create more fans, so that you don't lose half your fan base when both those guys are gone. And ultimately, I think that the UFC has to adapt to a new, more modern era that we live in today. So that's my take on all of this. I think that there's a lot of things that you can do and you can fix in the UFC, but it's easier said than done. If I left anything out of the video, let me know, because I'm sure there's a couple of things that the UFC could do to improve that I might have left off. So let me know what you guys think. As for next week's video, I've got a UFC 329 preview video coming up where I'll give you my picks and predictions for the fight card. So I'm really excited for that coming up. Stay tuned for that one. I'll see you guys soon.